Hi, everybody, and welcome again to Ukraine Voices from Within. And this time we're recording all the way from Kyiv, Ukraine. And I'm super excited to sit here among colleagues, family, friends. And it's so exciting to have this podcast recorded also on video and also on audio. So if you're listening on Spotify or any other platform, please go ahead to our YouTube YouTube channel so you can see also the beautiful faces of the people that sit next to me. And again, we're recording from Kyiv, Ukraine, and beside me, as always, Maxim. Maxim, say hi.
Hello to everybody.
And yeah, we're super excited to have two wonderful guests with us here that they're representative of an amazing nonprofit that I'm very much involved with called Ukrainian Patriot. And the interesting thing is you don't have to be Ukrainian in order to be Ukrainian Patriot. And the amazing guests we have here are going to explain more where they're from, what they're doing, and why they're not necessarily need to be Ukrainian in order to be Ukrainian Patriot. So with no further ado, I will let each one of you to kind of share a little bit of who you are, where you came from, and kind of like very briefly 60 seconds, and then we'll dive into more questions.
Sounds good. My name is Kaitlyn Kruk. I was born and raised in Vegreville, Alberta, Canada. I now live on the West Coast in Vancouver. I do have Ukrainian roots, and so I have lived here before, traveled to Ukraine before, and when the full-scale invasion started, I just knew I had to take some sort of action. Joined up with Ukrainian Patriot just about 10 days after the full scale had started, and about 6 months later found my feet on the ground here in Ukraine, back for a second time for a little bit longer, and I know there'll be more trips in the future as well.
That's awesome.
My name's Solodchuck. I'm an Australian. I suck at this stuff. Basically, I have Ukrainian heritage as well. I had been living a comfortable life in Australia. The war expanded and broke out. I followed it pretty intensely for about 12 months and made the decision that I needed to be here on the ground and help and sort of connect with Ukraine and be a part of their fight.
Can you tell us a little bit, you said I was living a comfortable life in Australia. Can you tell us a little bit more of the world that you're coming from? And again, it happened with a lot of the guests that we bring here to the podcast. We once again meet people that dedicate their 3 T's, time, talent, and treasure to Ukraine. And they fly here on their own dime, in their own time, and they left everything behind in their home countries and their kind of privileged life and decide to come here. So kind of tell us what you guys been doing in Canada and Australia before coming here?
Yeah, like Evan said, a comfortable life. I thought I had things figured out, and I had an apartment and a great job, and went on weekend adventures with friends and vacations and dinners out. But watching family, friends, contacts, just the general of Ukraine fighting this fight while we were back home doing that in a sense. Not that it felt wrong, but it felt like I could do more. So I always put it at the forefront to amplify what was happening. But I feel that in North America, for example, or maybe even Australia, we get in this rotation of our comfortable life, and it's very easy to look away. And I knew that taking myself out of that was going to be a great challenge and growth, and coming here and kind of reminding people that privilege is kind of our pacifism, whatever the word is, of we see it, but we're comfortable and we're sharing an Instagram story about what's happening. That's not really maybe putting it into action or amplifying it the same kind of way. And so I know for myself, when family and friends saw me on the ground in a bulletproof vest, it became a lot more real to them. It became a different kind of reality. And then me being able to go back and say, this is what's actually happening, not what you're just seeing, by the couple little news stories, or boo-hoo, one person, was killed. This is happening every day. All the time there's this fight on the front line. All the time there's constant shellings and bombings and things. And I just wanted to make it more real for me and for the people in my life.
Kaitlyn touched on it, sort of the privilege of peace. Australia is an incredibly safe country. by the standards of a lot of places.
Aggressive kangaroos.
Aggressive kangaroos, snakes, crocodiles, and everything
The
else that
wildlife.
wants to kill you. But you know, geopolitically, we're very secluded from the world, really, and I don't think anyone in Australia ever has to be worried about their neighbour kicking down the door at the moment. So that's what I meant by comfortable. Sort of the existential threats, you know, to our existence are pretty much non-existent. For me, it was just those freedoms and privileges that I enjoyed in Australia were also what were directly being assaulted here with the full-scale invasion. And for months and months and months, I watched Ukrainians struggle and suffer for the values that we hold true in the West. And it just became more and more important to me to be involved on the ground in a meaningful way. I remember when I'd already made the decision to come, and I was watching news and following stuff as I do, and there was this little girl that had been hit with shrapnel, and she was on her way into the hospital, and you could just see this fear in her eyes, this fear and confusion. And I have a little daughter, and I just remember thinking to myself that if that was, you know, my little girl, I'd want the whole world there to help. And so it made it very clear to me that this is where I needed to be.
Like once you cross the border with Ukraine, what is the experience of blending in, finding your place of figuring out what you have to do, like what's the best value you can bring, like what charities, what organizations to participate in, like what was your experience of finding yourselves in Ukraine, and where do you fit in?
For myself, I lived here a few years ago, and
So you do have a history with Ukraine.
yeah, so I have a history in Ukraine,
Can you
and
elaborate a little bit more about that?
I studied Ukrainian dance here, culture, and kind of the history for a year. I lived in 5 different cities over the span of a year, and the girls that I lived with, and often we would say, like, we just felt the most at home here. When I went back to North America, I found a piece of me here that I didn't even know I had in me, and it felt like I really connected, like, with my babusia and this whole kind of this roots of connections through Ukraine. It just felt like home, and even I just knew I needed to come back. The plan was always to come back, and then the pandemic, and now the full scale, and so it seemed fitting to just come back, even though there was a war. But I remember crossing and wondering if I was ever going to get my passport back on the train, thinking, oh, shoot. But I remember seeing, it was probably 3:00 in the morning, and seeing the, like, Ukraine sign in the shadows that we'd crossed the border. And I honestly just, like, cried, like maybe not sad, maybe not happy, just emotional. Like, I just knew in my heart and my soul that this is where I had to be. I couldn't really explain the feeling. I still can't to a lot of people. I had already had a history with Ukrainian Patriot, our founder, Lana Nyland. I've spent many hours in a dance studio with her, getting yelled at and pointing our toes. And so it kind of started to become the running joke that it was time to trade in the dance shoes for the bulletproof vest. And so I'd already been working from remotely online, looking up supplies for IFACs, looking at different donors, looking at the various ways that Ukrainian Patriot supports on the ground here in Ukraine. So coming here just made it a full circle of really seeing where I fit in. Not speaking the language, definitely still being a Westerner in the country. I just don't care. I just rock it. I think here there's something so special about Ukraine and Ukrainians that are so welcoming at any time. We all know that. Like, you go into a house and you might not be hungry, but you're going to roll out of there. Or you don't want to drink, but there's already a drink in front of you. And they're so welcoming, and they're so kind of accepting no matter what. And that's what I want to move forward and cherish in my own life with people. So I feel like just here, I don't know, it just feels right.
For me, I didn't really have too many expectations, I guess. Once I'd made the decision to come, I was in country within 3 weeks. I didn't actually have any volunteer opportunities at that point. I was just kind of lucky enough to get put in touch with Lana and UP, and that was about a week before I got here. The thing that was the biggest struggle for me actually coming here was whether or not I was doing the right thing by Ukraine. Like, this idea that would Ukrainians be happy to have me here trying to help, or is it just, what are you doing here? Why are you here? Why would you do that? And that changed very quickly for me. It was even before I got over the border, waiting at the train and meeting Ukrainians that were travelling back into Ukraine, and they just start talking because you're a Westerner and they're interested, and you tell them what you're up to, and just this real pure, simple generosity and thankfulness that you were coming there to assist. And it made me realise how important it is for Ukrainians that the world is here and the world sees them. And as I continued my time and journey through Ukraine, it was just a constant with people that I'd meet and people that I'd interact with. Not only the people that we help on the ground with Ukrainian Patriot, but people I still bump into randomly at a restaurant or down the street, or your Bolt driver. It's a constant sort of conversation that you have, and it still remains. That generosity is there, and it's really, it continues to power me to be here and continue to help these people, because I think they are so deserving of help and assistance.
Day-to-day, how it looks like, and more about the activity of Ukrainian Patriot and how your life blend into that, because again, you 100% volunteer your time, talent, treasure to this organization and to Ukraine. So kind of tell us a little bit more about the day-to-day.
Well, if you're a Monday to Friday person, it just doesn't work for you.
I think generally in Ukraine.
Yeah, generally in Ukraine, kind of time floats, and there's that joke of Ukrainian time and whatnot. And I think for some people, maybe that's actually good. I used to be like a very strict 9-to-5 work, how to schedule, how to whatever. And coming here, you just float and ride the waves of whatever might happen, or whatever and wherever you need to be. With Ukrainian Patriot, I mean, we spend days at the warehouse. We go on runs for 7 to 10 days at a time. You might have 24 hours notice. You might have 2 days notice. You might have 5 hours notice. It just kind of is the reality of the situation now. Things are constantly changing. Things are evolving, and plans are evolving, and people step in different places. So it's a little bit fly by the seat of your pants, but I think that if you can have the ability to do that, that shows some serious inner growth and serious willingness to be here and want to do that. I simply don't care what I'm doing every day, as long as I'm helping Ukraine or doing what is needed to be done. And I trust in all the people that are running our logistics and our this and our that, when they say we need you here in an hour to do this, that's what's top priority for me. And so I'm kind of like Evan said, you kind of have to have the no expectations and just roll with it. So we kind of go all over and do a lot of everything.
Kaitlyn kind of covered what we do on the day-to-day. It's just what's required.
Can you share? Yeah.
I guess the one thing I will add about Ukrainian Patriot as an organisation is that from when I started working with them to now, I've just developed so much faith in that what we do on the day-to-day has an impact for Ukrainians, be it defenders, be it civilians, be it long-term projects that are looking at the future of Ukraine. All of our efforts are always driven to supporting Ukraine, and it makes it very easy to just get up and do what's required of the day.
From what I understand, you guys, both of you, are leading runs as well. So you're not only taking the responsibility to deliver aid and whatever is needed, you're also responsible for other people's lives and other volunteers. You're kind of like the captains of between 2 to 10 people on a run.
So the runs are kind of the icing on the cake in the work that we do, because we put a lot of hours into the warehouse, packing clothes, food bags, hygiene, all the sort of aid that we get out, protective gear, medical gear. So we'll load up in Kyiv, we'll take off in whatever direction we're heading, be it east or south, and then we'll start to visit civilian communities mainly at the start and deliver food and hygiene and things like that. And then we'll generally sort of finish with some more military-based stuff or medical stuff closer to the front. So we do operate really safely, and we try and operate, with awareness. And but we also do operate in riskier areas. It's not Kyiv. Places like Kramatorsk and Kherson, for example, can be quite dangerous at times. But we just yeah, I guess what we do is so important and so fulfilling that risk is really worth taking for all of us on the ground.
There is this saying that, like, when there is one casualty or several casualties, those are tragedies, but when there are plenty of casualties, that is statistics. And a year and a half into the war, into the full-fledged invasion of Russia, like, this is how it is starting, or has already long ago started, to look for the world. And it is crucial that the world knows about what's going on in Ukraine through human stories, through attaching the pictures to the headlines in the news. So my question to you is, during your work generally, but also during your trips, humanitarian trips and to the front lines, what have been some stories, some most impactful stories that you would like to share with the world, like the human stories, the families you have met, things you have heard about what they've been through, your personal impressions on what they're going through, like anything, like the brightest in the notorious sense of the word that the world needs to know.
That's why it's really important to put a face to it. When we're on a run, as Evan said, we're in spicier, dicier areas, and often those are the people that need it the most. And with UP, one thing that I am really prideful of and happy to see that this is always continuing is that it's not just about what we deliver. Yes, of course, they need food bags and hygiene and all those things, but it's really about the light and the love and the connection that we bring to people. Some of my fondest memories are sitting with the little babusias and getting all the kisses on the cheek for the rest of my life. My babusia is no longer with us, and so for me, it's to find those people when they say like, oh, you're just like my granddaughter, and it's so wonderful that you're here, and I've been through this 3 times in my life already, and maybe they're apologizing to me for speaking only Russian because they're in southern Ukraine, and that's just how their life has been for so many ways. Those things are really important to amplify that maybe wasn't their choice. That's actually from a long history of oppression. And what's happening right now is a fight on democracy and independence and freedom of choice of where Ukraine and the country wants to be. And the whole world really needs to understand that and get on board with that this didn't just start in February of last year. This didn't just start in 2014. This has been going on for a really long time, and these people have these stories from that long ago. So for me, it's really connecting with the more elderly people and listening to their tales of how fearless and how strong and resilient they are to be yet again going through something like this, or still going through something like this. And then to see the youngest generation, the children and the things. On one of our most recent runs, we were in southern Ukraine, in Kherson, and we delivered to an island that is, well, let's call it the in-between of occupied territory and not. And Kherson is not a quiet city ever. It is constant shelling and constant terror. And on this little island, there is under about 100 people with about 4 children. And these children are all, I think the eldest was about 12 or 13 years old. And they're playing in their underwear because it's a hot summer day, and they're, sitting with their little puppy dog, and we're giving them a hygiene kit and, little candies and toys. And there is booms going on around in the background, and these kids are not even flinching. Like you can't even get a smile out of them. And they're just so kind of numb. And as somebody who teaches children and works with children before, it breaks my heart. And that's part of the reason that those children can't have that same story as the 85-year-old that I saw an hour before. That needs to be different. And I do feel like it is our responsibility as a world to not put them in that position anymore, to change that for them. There was one little boy, we sat there for a good 10 minutes trying to get him to smirk or to smile and feed him chocolate and whatnot, and I finally did it. But I can't even imagine what a 4-year-old is looking back at me in a helmet and a vest, some weird lady speaking English and broken Ukrainian is processing through his head. So some of those moments are really what stick out to me and are really kind of telling to why and what we're doing.
It's actually quite difficult for me to sort of remember an individual story that I've been told. It is difficult with the language barrier, so often I'm getting stories from people secondhand when we're meeting with babushas and having tea and things like that. But one thing that does stand out for me is just the amount of trauma in all the people that we deal with along the front lines and in deoccupied areas. They often can't communicate without becoming emotional, and it's really hard for them to express what has happened. And places like Izium, where their houses that they've lived in with their partners for their whole lives, and they've raised their families there, and it's gone and it's destroyed, and it's just, there is very big emotional scars that are going to take an incredibly long time to heal. That's kind of all that I really think of when I think of that question.
You mentioned it, both of you, a little bit, that the explosions and the booms that you hear, and by the way, just like for the audience to understand, some of the areas that Ukrainian Patriot is operating at, you don't have an air raid siren. You have the boom, and then after that, the air raid siren, because it's so close to the border. So it's kind of 50-50 chance if you're going to survive it or not. And many people say, well, if I'm going to get hit, this is my day. And this is the reality for most of the people in the south and east Ukraine and all over the country, because it might hit us right now while we're sitting here and recording this podcast. So the fact that we, the community, children, got used to those explosive, it's kind of like a background noise. We kind of ignore it. It becomes like a second nature. So having those experiences, meeting the people, being in a very dangerous situation, and also on top of that, taking responsibility not only for your own life, but also the teams that you lead and the community that gathers around you. Having all of this, and for both of you, it's your second round here. You're going back home to your normal life. How was that? How was the experience, the feeling, interact with people that never been? And let's hope they're not going to be in those situations. Can you share a little bit more about kind of also PTSD? Like you guys also had some trauma that you went back home with.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's inevitable. I know lots of people have great concern, like, why would you put yourself in that situation and give yourself that kind of PTSD? And not that you can ever compare it, because you just can't. But like Evan said, you see these people with so many scars. We all have our own scars. Everybody has had trauma or horrible things happen to them, whether it's in a country at war or other personal life events. And I really do believe a lot of those things make you stronger. And in this context, it's such a small amount. I'm not forced to be here, but helping those people just makes it worth it. It just makes it, like I said, feel like it's our responsibility. Yes, being in some of these places it can be scary. There is constant shelling, or, you're seeing air raids all the time and you don't know where that's going to land, but you roll over and go to sleep anyways. And I think taking it home, it's just really important to take care of ourselves. It's important to amplify it that we are immensely privileged in North America to not have to worry about that, to go home. And I do remember getting home the first few nights and I had my air raid app and it would go off and I'd be like, oh, but I'm in Canada, so I don't actually have to, like, it was like I was almost more worried because I knew I wasn't there and I wasn't around the people that I care about. Or, with UP, like in our safe house, that we're family. When we're on a run, we're a family. Like, I'm probably the younger out of all of them, but they're like my little ducks or children. Like, we have to make sure everybody stays together and takes care of each other. And that's just kind of the responsibility you take on when you become a part of our team. And I think that really, shows through all of the members that have stuck on with us and continue to come back, such as Evan and I, and then has turned us into great leaders in what we do and keeping everybody safe so that we can keep doing it, because the need is not going to stop right now. Even if we won tomorrow, there's still going to be a great amount to continue to help with. And I think our little bit of trauma that comes with it is it's just kind of a part of the deal, but it makes it worth it for all the good that we're doing.
For me, going home was incredibly difficult. I don't think I was really ready to leave Ukraine the first time, but I'd set myself a 6-week time limit, and trying to adjust to a country not in war, was much more difficult than adjusting to one in war. I went home, had a house full of crap that I just didn't want anymore. I had to go to a job which was just me in a hotel room painting walls or changing tap washers or doing whatever, and it just seemed so useless compared to what I'd been doing. And then you sort of combine that with the people around you, that everybody has their problems and it's amazing how insignificant even your own problems, but everyone else's problems just start to seem, and it becomes really difficult to deal with people, and even with really, really good friends, it becomes a real constant conflict within yourself when you're trying to deal with them. When I left, I originally had a plan of being back in 3 to 6 months, and I was back within a month. I just knew that this is where I needed to continue to be, and I'm far more comfortable here than I am at home currently.
Because you're here, you always lived in Ukraine. I've been abroad multiple times and lived in other countries. Hearing what they have to say, how it makes you feel as a Ukrainian?
Very emotional, because once again, this is something that you were starting from when you introduced everything, like what we're going to talk about, that being a Ukrainian Patriot does not require you to be a Ukrainian. So first of all, like that dedication, and like at first I had hard time understanding that, like, how can people become that committed, like when they don't, like it's not imperative for them, like it does not come from the bottom of the Maslow pyramid for them. It's just their choice because they have very strong, like, moral convincement that this is like the thing they need to do. And when I said that this was emotional, it was because of like how I found out that this was not a one-off thing, like not a single person, it was not like an exception, but like there are so many different people that we have met on this podcast. They've like come from very different sectors, like some of them have been volunteers at the front lines, some of them have even been like prisoners of war in Russia, some of them have been working on the humanitarian side of things, etc., etc. So they have very different background, but still, like the amount of those people and the geography they come from, I cannot like, I can understand more readily people coming from Europe here because the security situation has an immediate spillover effect into Europe. But like people from over the pond, and like from Australia, like that does not even have to, a country that does not even have to fear any invasion because of the very geolocation it has. It is about something like bigger. It's about a bigger thing. I'm sorry, like how pathetic it sounds, but it seems to be, like it indeed seems to be the foundation of things. Like that's how and why it works. And that, of course, brings about the belief in humanity that may at times have been lost during this very hard years.
And I wonder if this war in Ukraine and this conflict will change humanity in the world. Because again, we see a collection of people from all over the world coming here and doing good and impacting the lives of others, and kind of not necessarily putting their wants and needs aside and enjoying the fulfillment of doing good in the world. And there is so much ahead of us in Ukraine, so much projects, so much rebuilding to do, so much, a lot of work. And it's not going to end next month or next year or in the next 5 to 10 or 20 years. And it's kind of like, I want to talk to the audience out there, be inspired by people like Kaitlyn and Evan that basically decided to put their lives on hold and to come and help. And everyone, each one of us, all over the world can impact and influence and make a difference. It can come, with your time spending here as a volunteer or volunteer elsewhere, fundraising, donations, going and talking with your representative to make sure that your country continues to support Ukraine. There's so many ways that you can contribute, because there's people, once again, like amazing volunteers here that's sitting next to us that flew from the other side of the world to Ukraine, a country that they're not necessarily understand, and definitely not necessarily speak the language. You're an exception. You do speak the language very, very beautifully. Good job.
So you at Ukrainian Patriot, you represent quite a big chunk of the humanitarian aid that is coming in and being aggregated in Ukraine for the needs of Ukrainians in the front lines and around. But of course, the needs of Ukraine are immense, and every donation, every effort is not going to be in vain. So from your experience, and if you had to share this in a list order, for instance, to the world, we have worked here, have been working here, and we now call on the world that Ukraine needs this, that, and that. So what would you tell the world? It may be political support, if you're comfortable discussing that, or humanitarian sector, the things that you are doing. What would be the message about the things that Ukraine, or maybe they're not things, that Ukraine needs in order to, and Ukrainian people need in order to get along and to, to survive basically all of this?
Well, UP is based on 5 pillars, and one of the very first things that started back in the end of February of last year was protective gear. I very much believe, even when I'm having very angry days at our neighbors that have chosen to start this, that nobody else needs to die for this to be over. Death is not the answer. The terror is not the answer, but being protected is. My family, my friends have signed up, left their lives here in Ukraine and in Canada and in the United States to head to the front line in their jeans and their Nikes, no medical training, no anything. So with Ukrainian Patriot, that was kind of one of the first things that started, was protective gear. And I do think that and medical, which were the two kind of main that really started at the very beginning, are one of the most important things. We need to keep our men and women on the front protected, our men and women all along the borders protected, and if God forbid, something does happen, that we have the proper medical care and medical attention for them to ensure that they can keep going back and fighting that good fight. On the humanitarian side, of course, people need food bags and different things, but amplifying what's happening and amplifying the effect on people, the PTSD, the trauma, and how to deal with that, and the different and various ways to deal with that and work through that, is also very, very important. And it's important for the world to understand, and Ukrainians to understand, that it can start now. Rebuilding our minds and our bodies can start now. The same way that right now we have a project, many projects are already starting, of rebuilding someone's home, rebuilding a school, rebuilding those things. It's kind of like not letting them win in some ways, that these things should be starting to be on the forefront. And the world needs to also recognize that there is more to just, oh, we're with you, Ukraine. Okay, but how are they actually doing? Or, can we actually talk to people? Can psychologists get on a Zoom call? There is, like you said, there is lots to do without even being on the ground here, to amplify some of those specific needs, I would say, to get the country moving in a direction of rebuilding and healing, while also still fighting this war, so that when it is over, we're back stronger than ever.
Yeah, I think sort of in line with what Kaitlyn says, but more on a personal belief level, I think there needs to be growing, ongoing military support. Unfortunately, I think the reality is, this war will be won conventionally, and it will take a large amount of time, and the world needs to continue to bring Ukraine what it needs to continue the fight, and it needs to increase, and it needs to continue to increase. On a humanitarian level, and Ukraine as a country, I think there needs to be investment there needs to be a drive from the outside world to start to put money into rebuilding the things that Kaitlyn's speaking about, rebuilding the communities, strengthening the communities, getting stuff like mental health support going, and just getting the money turning over. Because if you wait until after the war is over, it's going to take so long to recover. And Ukraine has such amazing potential after this fight, and even now, really, that the world needs to get on board and push that.
Everything is peaceful and beautiful and magical, and everything is great. Are you guys catching a flight back home, or are you staying here?
I wouldn't be going anywhere, and though my time on this trip is coming to an end shortly, there are already plans in the works to come back. I will spend as much time forever and always as I can in Ukraine, because even if everything was magical and hunky-dory tomorrow, like we just said, there's so much rebuilding and so much help to do. And I've been a part of it this long. Why would I quit now? That feels like letting people down, letting, my heritage down, my country down in that kind of sense. But it would be letting myself down. I just don't believe that's not who I am. That's not who I want to be. So no way. That just means there's a lot more work ahead of us right away.
I feel the same. If the war was to end tomorrow, besides maybe a couple of days at some beaches in Crimea,
Yeah.
I think there's still a lot of work to be done here, and there's things that I want to do in Ukraine that are after the war. There's things I want to see. There's places I want to experience, and it just doesn't feel like now's the time to do those things. So they are definitely plans for after victory. So no, I'd still be here for quite some time, I think.
What are the key several conclusions, key thoughts and messages you would like to leave our audience with about Ukraine, about your experience, about what's going to be next, and about what needs to be done? Key things.
If you think you can't, you can. I struggled a long time, not a long time, but I often wondered if my time was maybe not as helpful here on the ground as me being back in Canada, amplifying voices and raising money and doing different things. But I think if you have that inner struggle, if you want to go, just go. If you want to be here on the ground, we're open arms for wonderful volunteers. If you think that you should share that post, or you're hesitating because somebody might think something, share the damn post. I just think the hesitation in a lot of our world and not following our heart and what we really believe internally, not what everybody else thinks, because what everybody else thinks just doesn't matter. What do you want to do? How do you want to help? And what is your impact that you want to make? I think that when you have that figured out, just follow it, because it really, I know for me, I haven't felt or more like myself or who I want to be in this world more than I ever have here. And that's kind of a bizarre situation, being in a country at war, but it makes me really proud of all the things that we accomplish here, all the things that we're going to keep accomplishing. And I know there's a lot of people out there who are kind of at that in-between of hesitation, and just do it. Just go, just do it. Because there's always something bigger than you to step into.
I think the world just needs to continue to pay attention, to not get tired. And that falls down to individual people. You need to continue pushing awareness for what's going on here. You need to continue talking about it to everybody. Have it in the back of your mind whenever you have a conversation. Be aware, be educated about what's going on, and just continue to educate the people around you, because what is happening here is so... the result of this conflict has far-reaching geopolitical implications. What happens here dictates how other nations similar to Russia will behave for the next 100 years. And I firmly believe that this war needs to finish with everything that was Ukraine is Ukraine again. Russia cannot take a single piece of land out of this conflict. And that will only happen if the world continues to support Ukraine and keep Ukraine in their minds, keep Ukraine in their hearts. And remember that they're not just fighting for Ukraine, they are fighting for all of us, for all our freedoms, for all our values. they are the ones that are suffering, not us.
Every time I hear stories about international volunteers that come here, that inspire me to continue to do the work that I'm doing. When, I don't know if I share it in previous podcasts, but I was born here, moved to Israel, lived in Israel most of my life. And when I became very much involved with Ukraine, my parents were very surprised. They're like, we didn't think that you still have this, kind of connection to this country. You only lived here for 6 years. And they thought that they thought I will do all those things for Israel, not necessarily for Ukraine. I will do them for both of those countries because I feel like both Israel and Ukraine are my countries. But you guys touch a very important thing. Ukraine is not fighting only for Ukraine. Ukraine is fighting for all of us, for freedom and democracy, for all humanity, for all the world's, well-behaving. And if Ukraine is going to stop fighting and push back, Ukraine is no longer going to exist. If Russia will stop fighting, the war will stop. And your spirit and your obligation to Ukraine is inspiring. So thank you so much for everything that you're doing. And please keep amplifying, in using your word here, the activities that you're doing and to bring more people to do what they do. And as we share all the time on this podcast, keep Ukraine in your minds, hearts, and actions. And all those actions can come in various options. One of them is to donate to Ukrainian Patriot, so they will continue to do amazing activity on the ground and impact the lives of others. And your donation, even if it's $5, $10, 20,000, whatever you want to donate, will make a huge impact, because $1 American dollar or Canadian dollar, Australian dollar or pound is going a long, long way in Ukraine and really makes a difference in this world. Those amazing people here basically donating their time and money to this country. So one-time donation to Ukrainian Patriot is going to make a huge difference. Maxime, anything to add?
Just amen to what you said, because I would not like to, by adding something, I would not like to steal the spotlight from the guests because of the importance of why they're here, what they're doing. So I can just join Anna in her final thoughts that follow this example, help them in their work, and keep Ukraine on your agenda so that everybody is better off, not just in Ukraine, but also eventually in all the free world.
Slava Ukraine.
Heroям слава!